Hi everybody, it is Sunday morning and we are going to take a trip around the world. I just got the lights turned on, so this is going to be a very impromptu around the world update. We might actually discover some things together this morning, but we're going to find out. I haven't even been around the room and looked in all the tanks just yet. Starting here at my 40-gallon Waterfall tank, not a lot going on in the tank as far as the fish are concerned. I did add a few new fish lately. We've got some guppies in there that I added. I put 3 of the platinum guppies in. One of those has died. I do have that in the freezer in the other room. It's still well within my 2 weeks that I can return it, and I'll get my money back for that little guppy. I'll probably just replace it, so I have another platinum guppy in here. I also released several of the blue wag and the high fin platies. They're still doing well. I still have not seen my Bristlenose Pleco. I put a Bristlenose Pleco in here a while ago, and it was a tiny little thing, and I have not seen hide nor hair of it since it's gone in there. Well, I did see it one time a couple days later, but I have not seen it since then. So I honestly at this point have no idea whether it's even still in there. I haven't seen any real signs of it. There's no areas that have been scraped clean, obviously, by something that would be like a Pleco or something. So I'm not sure what's going on, whether or not that little bristlenose is still in there. In theory it is. I don't see why it wouldn't be, but I haven't seen it, so I can't confirm that it is definitely in there. The only other thing I've really got going on with this tank is that I've got some flowers blooming on my Rex begonia here. That's kind of exciting. I was noticing the other day how thick the duckweed is starting to grow in mats. It's really starting to get thick and clumpy, and even down here across the face of it, I could probably scrape a pound of duckweed right off the front of the waterfall there. Of course, the top basin's starting to fill up with it too. But otherwise, not much going on. I did have a little leak in it a while ago that, as I suspected, sealed itself as they always seem to. I don't know whether it's just the general grunge that, you know, develops in water, or algae growing, or what it is, but whenever a leak develops, it always just seems to seal itself after a few days, and the drip goes away and I don't have any more leak, and that's what happened again in this case. So no worries there. The tank itself is looking fantastic. I'm really enjoying the new Buenos Aires tetras in there, and I've even got a couple of other guppies in there that are new, some brightly colored ones, so I'm happy about that. But as I said, not a lot going on with this tank. My little foot tank, same as always, just ticking over like a clock. I never really do anything with this tank except sprinkle some food in there every day. And if you look very closely down there in the corner, you can see there still are shrimp. Somewhere in there is my cherry barb. There's a few guppies swimming around. And this is just one of those tanks that I never really ever do anything with. Once or twice a year maybe it gets a little water change or something. Other than that, I just top the water off. This tank does have a deep sand bed though, and I believe that deep sand bed is what is responsible for this tank always being nice and clean, despite the fact that I never do anything with it. And if you look really close, you can see a shrimp right on the glass there next to the power cord. That's another one of those ghost shrimp in there. So I've had shrimp in this tank for years, and they're clearly in there either living for many years or they're breeding and keeping the population going while they're in there. So that's about all I can think of with this tank. We're going to go ahead and get the lights turned out on this one, and that will reduce the amount of glare we have on the other tanks as we make our way around the room. So I've got camera equipment and stuff everywhere. Bear with me a moment here. 29 Miscellaneous Tank. Nothing really going on in here. I added this new Angelfish not too long ago. A lot of you are familiar with that already. It's still doing really well. It looks fantastic. It's growing nice and healthy. It is a voracious eater. When I start putting food in the tank, it just goes nuts for the food. And you can see now, it just sees me standing in front of the tank and it's getting all excited and coming up. And so no problems with this angelfish. Very good, healthy appetite. Very energetic eater. Not worried about it at all. It's been in the tank for a few weeks now. Plus it went through quarantine. So I think we're definitely in the clear on this fish. Pretty obviously, I need to do a little bit of maintenance on this tank. I'll probably just do a water change. I've topped it off a couple times over the last month or so. I don't do water changes very frequently on this tank, but it's probably about due for one. So again, nothing really to talk about. My clown pleco is still in there. I just saw that yesterday on the back glass. It usually, in fact, I can see it right now. It's hanging out behind the filter intake. You can just about kind of make out a little part of its fin. All my loaches are still doing well. And all of the new fish I've put in here, including that one single little Rasbora het, are all still doing well. So, moving on to, well, I'm kind of starting to think about this whole length of the room as Skid Row. I'm having problems with all three of these tanks. And we're going to start here with my 55-gallon Gourami tank. Although I don't really know what to say about it. I don't really know where to start. I've lost 2 fish in this tank recently. Neither one was a surprise, and neither one, I believe, is related to what's going on in the tank. What's going on in the tank just visually looks ugly, but the water's fine. I actually did a water change yesterday, and I checked the nitrate before I even did the water change, and it was at about 30 parts per million. So it's probably down to about 20 parts per million now. So the water's fine. The one fish I've lost most recently was my Moonlight Gourami. I've been watching that one for a while now, and its colors were starting to get weird. It was starting to get like weird sort of patches of like miscolored areas. Its mouth was starting to look a little funny, and I was kind of expecting it to be on the way out. And a few days ago, I did indeed find it in there dead, so I removed that. I checked into the lifespan of the Moonlight Gouramis, and they're about 4 to 5 years. I looked back on the playlist. In fact, I found the video where I put that angelfish in this tank, and that was a little more than 4 years ago, and the Gourami was already in there full grown. I'm sorry, it was a little more than 3 years ago that I put that angelfish in there, and the Gourami was already in the tank full grown. So the Gourami was probably at least 4 years old already. So again, we're talking about a fish that was at its maximum lifespan or its maximum age. I don't do a lot of puzzling over why a fish dies when it's that old. I was watching it fade over time. Again, no mystery. I just think my Moonlight Gourami's time came and it passed. I think the fact that we've got some issues, and I'm making air quotes here over issues in the tank simultaneously, I think that's just coincidence. I don't think it had anything whatsoever to do with the Gourami. And likewise with my Siamese algae eaters. A lot of you will remember I shot a video not long ago where I really thought that was going to be the day that I had to euthanize the Siamese algae eater. It was lying on the bottom of the tank. It looked like it was in distress. And eventually it got up and swam away and started behaving fairly normally. And it continued that behavior for a couple of weeks, but it got worse and worse and worse, and it took longer and longer to get up every day. And finally, the other day, I saw it lying in there in the middle of the afternoon. It was just lying on its side. It was still breathing, for lack of a better word, and I didn't do anything with it then. And when I came back later, I cannot find it now. I've looked and looked and looked, and I cannot find the fish's body. That's one of the reasons I did a water change yesterday. I actually got in here and rustled through all of this Java Windelov, hoping maybe I could find its body in there somewhere, but I couldn't. I ran my hand all along the back of the tank. I don't have any idea where the fish's body is, but I have been keeping my nose to the tank, and if I do start smelling any dead fishy smell, you know, I know how to deal with that or whatever. So I'm not too concerned about it, but I would kind of like to recover that fish's body. It was a pretty big one. It's not like a little neon disappeared or something. That's a pretty significant amount of dead fish in the tank, if indeed it is in there dead somewhere, and I'm assuming it is. So those are the two losses I've experienced in this tank. And as far as like what's going on with it, that I'm not so sure. I did a chemi-clean treatment a little while ago, and it sort of wiped out the green cyanobacteria. But the moment that happened, I started getting an explosion of green algae growing all over everything. And then the cyanobacteria sort of came back with a vengeance. I kind of stopped doing the treatments for a little while I was waiting to figure out kind of what's going on with this tank. And I had some, you know, fish that weren't doing well in here. So I stopped with the treatments. And I've been waiting and watching, and now the tank looks like this. So I don't know what's going on, but I do know that anytime you do anything in a fish tank, it just changes things, and who knows what kind of cascade effect you're gonna have after you've made some minor changes to a tank. You know, so that's one thing I've learned, and that's probably I changed something by doing that chemi-clean treatment or whatever, and now this is going on. I will also say that the 2 Siamese algae eaters in the tank, we're doing a really good job at keeping the tank clean. The one is now dead, and that one never does anything except sit there in the weeds. It's an old fish. I bought them very old. I bought them at the fish store for a few dollars because somebody had already turned them back in because they were really old fish. So I'm not expecting either one of them to live long, and at this point I'm not even expecting this one to do much in the way of cleaning algae. I really need to get some new, younger Siamese algae eaters in here that are actually going to get some algae devoured. And of course I need to get back on the chemi-clean treatment, or I might try something different besides the chemi-clean this time, just to mix it up and see if I get different results or something. I don't know. But this tank is kind of problematic, and it seems to me like I've always got at least one tank that has to be a drama queen and just make something problematic for me. I can never go around the room and just have all my tanks up and running nice and normal and looking good. I've always got one that is giving me problems in some way. So this is the problem tank for now, and we're going to move on to my 55-gallon I used to call this my Angelfish tank, but this is my 55-gallon tank. Same as usual in this tank. I talk about this. I keep saying how I'm going to go through here and clean out that Anubias one day. I'm going to get that all cleared up. Get the tank looking good. Here, let me move the light fixture forward so we can see into the tank a little more clearly. With the, I use the shop lights here. And if you put them centered just right, you get a row of lights on the front and a row of lights in the back. And then that black bar down the middle of the tank does not interfere with the lights. But in order to open the lid, I've got to push the lights back, and then that front row of lights actually sits right over top that center bar and really impacts how much light goes into the tank. So just by sliding that fixture forward a little bit, I changed the lighting that much. So when we look in this tank, one of the things I want to point out is how I've done nothing to the cyanobacteria. My regular long-term viewers know that not too long ago I started seeing that green cyanobacteria creeping its way through this tank, and it started coating everything and turning into like a green carpet or a green sheet. It looked like somebody spilled green paint all over the tank, and I haven't done anything. I talked about doing something about it for a long time, but I haven't done anything to it, and it's gone. Well, it's not gone. You can still see that dark green appearance here and there. You certainly still see some of that red cyanobacteria growing in there. But by and large, me not doing anything, just being patient and waiting, it's almost like the cyanobacteria burned itself out. It ate everything in the tank that it could eat, and now it's just sort of gone. So I'm not too worried about the cyanobacteria at this point anymore. I do still need to get in there, however, and clean out some of this Anubias. I want to cut it way back to here. I might even put some Java fern in there, some water sprite, who knows. I might even try some different kind of plant. But over the years I've kind of weeded out all the plants that don't do well in my water or in my aquariums, and I just don't bother with those plants. That's why most of my tanks have all the same types of plants in them. They're the ones that work for me without any fuss or muss or maintenance or foods or ferts, and if they can live like that, then that's the plant for me. The other thing I got going on in this tank is my beautiful green giant angelfish there. I do believe this fish is also on its way out. It's about 10 years old now. I'm sorry, it's about 8 years old now. 10 years is their maximum lifespan. And I did have this fish very early on in my fish keeping hobby, so this fish's first several years of life were in my, learning curve years, where I was trying all sorts of radical stuff with hydrogen peroxide treatments and massive water changes, and any of my fish that I've had around since my very early days in the fish keeping hobby had a rough time of it in their early days in my fish tanks. So the fact that they've survived this long is impressive in its own right. But I saw this fish in great distress the other day. Again, thought it was going to be dead. I did a water change, a series of water changes, and it sort of seemed to recover, and I was very happy about that. But I've noticed that it's still not right When I came in yesterday, I noticed it was drifting around, and the suction of the power head there, you can see how the power head's kind of pulling it in, and it seemed like it was sort of struggling to get away from the power head. It was kind of drifting onto its side a little bit. So I really do think we are kind of watching the, latter stages of this fish's life. And again, no big mystery. It's an old fish. I've had it for, about 8 years now. And, time takes its toll on all of us, so not a big mystery, but also not something I'm happy about. But that's the only real issue with this tank, is the fact that we're probably going to be losing a fish in it here in the very near future. That, and of course, it looks really messy and sloppy and all that kind of stuff. But the fish are fine, the water's fine, all that good stuff. It's just a bunch of crap growing on the leaves as usual. Now we get to this tank, and we're gonna have to move this out of my way. This is actually a big contraption I set up depending on where I'm shooting video, and it really reduces the amount of glare I get off of other tanks in the background and that sort of thing. So let's try to move it out of the way without knocking anything down, at least enough for me to get in front of this tank, sort of. And not a lot to talk about. We've already killed a lot of time, so we're not going to spend much on this tank. If you watched my last Around the World update, then you've already heard everything I've got to say about this tank. No changes, nothing's happened. I do need to get in and do a water change and wipe the glass down. You can see how dirty the glass is, and I say dirty. It's just got algae growing on it. I don't consider that dirty, but you know what I mean. You can see how low the water level is. It's been a while since I've even topped the tank off. This tank has just sort of gone into stasis in my brain, and I don't really even think about it. I do the bare minimum of maintenance. It's got a few fish in it. It's almost empty as far as fish are concerned, so it doesn't exactly build up the nitrate in organics and everything, so not too worried about it. You can actually see one of the fish right there, one of my Siamese algae eaters. You can almost see it through all the swampy glass there. So anyway, that's about all that's going on with my 40 breeder there. Not a lot to talk about. Now let's move this again, and we will have a look at my 125 gallon New World tank. Nothing at all to talk about in this tank. I did have a bit of a bacterial bloom recently for a few days there. It was questionable. I wasn't 100% sure whether I was seeing a bacterial bloom or whether I was experiencing an algae bloom, because it was starting to look a little bit on the greenish side, and I figured out why it looks green or looked green, and that was because the water itself was cloudy. And whenever you've got that sort of whitish appearance in the water, the white diffuses everything and spreads the light around. And when you've got all these bright lights shining down on green plants, and then you've got, in this case, I've got, I had even more, I had duckweed and everything. So I had bright light shining through the green plants, and it was putting green light into the tank that was then hitting that cloudy water, and it was diffusing that green light all through the water and gave very much the appearance of having sort of an algae outbreak or an algae bloom in the tank. When I scooped some of the water out of the tank and I looked at it in a white container, I was able to see that there was actually no green color in the water at all. So the green color must have been coming from just the diffusion of the green light from the plants. And once I figured that out and realized it was not an algae bloom but just a bacterial bloom, I just did what I always do, which is nothing. I sat back and watched, and it cleared up like a champ. And the tank looks great. Everything's doing well. No losses, no new additions, nothing else really going on. I've been chatting about mineralization in this tank and some eggshells and stuff like that, but you'll have to check out those other videos if you want to see more stuff about that. So moving on to my $40-gallon native tank. Actually, hang on one second here. I'm going to put you on pause here in a rare instance. We are going to move that black piece of cloth. I'm going to put it right here, and we're going to see what a difference it makes on how this tank looks with all that glare you're seeing. So sit tight 1 second. All right, now that looks a whole lot better, doesn't it? So that's a pretty handy little thing to have. It makes it kind of a pain in the butt to keep moving around the room, and I got to walk around it, and when I get back to my exercise area where my elliptical and all that stuff is, I got to move it out of the way. But it definitely makes for a lot better video, and I'm always striving to make my videos as best as possible. So I hope you all appreciate that, because it really does make a big difference in how these videos look with all the glare in the background. This is another thing I got to do away with, is this stupid silver tripod, which reflects no matter where I put it in the room. Anyway, moving back on to the fish keeping. If you notice right there, that really small mosquito fish, that's one of the offspring. I've actually had mosquito fish breeding in this tank, which I've never had before. I've mentioned it in the past. I know that it's not a big accomplishment to get mosquito fish to breed. It's like, you know, cheering about the fact that you're breeding guppies. It's not difficult, but I've never done it before. I've had mosquito fish in the past. They're also called gambusia. And despite the ease with which you would think they would breed, I have never had them breed before. So the fact that they're breeding in this tank makes me kind of excited. Don't see the crayfish at the moment. Actually, I do see the crayfish at the moment. If you look right in that back corner, he's hiding underneath the power head there, all curled up in sort of a ball. So we're going to leave him to it. Nothing else really to talk about with this tank. I do have plans for this tank. I want to add at least one more fish. I got an idea of what I want to put in there, but I don't want to talk about it yet, because if it doesn't pan out or come to fruition, then I don't want to have gotten anybody's hopes up or anything like that. But I'm going to get your hopes up enough to let you know that I am planning on putting something else in here. These fish are just, I don't know, I always think of fish as tanks as having like a specimen type fish, and then there's other fish. There's like the schooling fish, or there's bottom dwellers or whatever, but every tank needs like that fish that you see swimming around in the tank, and then the other stuff is almost like the accessory fish, you know, like you put neons in a tank as like a splash of sequins in the background and just some color to the tank, but the angelfish is the key fish in the tank or whatever. So this tank needs one of those fish. And again, I got a pretty good idea what I think I want to put in there, if I can catch one that's small enough and, you know, the right species and so on and so forth. So look forward to something coming up with that pretty soon. Hopefully we'll be able to even shoot some outdoor video while we go out and try to collect something for it. But that's in the future, so we'll get to that when we get to it. We're going to move on now to my 125 gallon tank. Got to come all the way over here around the waterfall and carefully back up without tripping over anything, and now we can get the whole tank in view. So a few things going on in this tank, nothing really bad in particular, but I have made some changes in here recently if you haven't been following along. The first thing I did was I added 2 Siamese algae eaters and a little Cinodantis Catfish. And the red-tailed shark, I'm sorry, the rainbow shark I have in here immediately went after the Siamese algae eaters. Was not happy about them being in the tank at all. But after a couple of days, it sort of settled down. You know, it's still a little aggressive with them. It's a shark. It's always going to be, but it's not constantly chasing the fish around the tank and just never, ever leaving them alone. So I don't have to worry too much about that being an issue anymore. The other thing I noticed, and I just noticed this the other night, I was shooting a video for my Patreon patrons, just a little chit-chat behind the scenes late night video. And while we were standing here looking at the tank, I noticed that my shark had found my little Cinodantis and was just relentlessly harassing it. And that's what we were just witnessing again. That's what it was doing underneath that rock, that little Cinodantis. I don't know if you saw it wriggle out and dart around to the other side of the tank, but it just tries to hide constantly, and all it does is that shark just finds it apparently and just keeps harassing it. It's even hiding like underneath my tenopoma in there now, and the shark is still lingering around. So I'm not 100% sure what to do about that. The Cinodantis catfish are not defenseless catfish by any means. They're armored, first of all. They've got like a bony plate in their head that protects them. And they're also venomous. Like most catfish, they have venom in their dorsal fin, their dorsal spike, I should say, and their pectoral spikes, those long, bony, bony protrusions that are the base of their pectoral fin, you know, there's that pectoral spike. If you've ever been pricked by one of them, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's very, very painful to get poked by one of those spikes on a catfish, and that pain is coming from the venom that is in those spikes. I know a lot of people don't realize that, but most catfish are actually venomous fish. And so what's going to happen between that shark and that catfish, I'm not entirely sure. But that shark seems to be in its glory. He's chasing everybody. He's chasing the other Siamese algae eaters around. He keeps hunting down that Cinodantis. He chases the rainbow fish around from time to time. It's almost like he's just doing it for something to do. But the Cinodantis seems problematic. He seems like he's really, really harassing that Cinodantis. Like, he hunts it down, he finds it, he goes into the little nooks and crannies where it's trying to just mind its own business in these little caves, and yet for some reason that shark will still go bother it in one of those little caves. I don't know why. You know, it's not like a line of sight thing. I mean, the catfish is hiding from it, and yet it still goes and finds it to harass it. So I don't know what that's going to mean in the long run. I mean, once the catfish gets a little bit bigger, it might actually kill that shark. It might spike it with one of its pectoral fins. You know, they thrash sideways like that when they stick their fins out. That's an attempt to jab their aggressor with their fin and stick them. And so, you know, what if that happens to the shark? I don't know. But the Cinodantis, I think, will be okay. As long as it's getting food, it'll grow fairly quickly. And I think once it gets a little bit bigger, I don't think that shark will have a whole lot to say to it anymore. But it's still a disturbing situation. And I need to get, you know, I don't know. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if I should try to get that catfish out of the tank. I definitely don't want to take the shark out of the tank. I love the shark in this tank. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. The color scheme and everything. That shark absolutely belongs in this tank. So I'd really like to have the catfish in here too. I just think I might need to wait until that catfish is a little bit bigger and then bring it back once it's gotten, you know, big enough to take care of itself in the tank or something. I don't know. We'll have to see. The other thing that I've done to the tank that is new is the addition to this Lavender Gourami. A friend of mine was having problems with it. It was being a little bit aggressive with some of his fish, and so he gave it to me rather than taking it back to the fish store. So she's about a year old. It's a female, and if I understand correctly, the lavenders are a hybrid cross between the blue gourami and the gold gourami, which are both 3-spots, you know, 3-spot color morphs. So the Lavender Gourami is just another one of the 3-spot color morphs. And she's getting along fine, no problems at all in the tank. The worst I see is a little bit of her having to dash away when the shark chases her, but that's for about 2 seconds, and then that's all over with, and she goes back to eating algae and swimming around doing her thing. So I'm really, really happy with that addition. She's working out really well. And I know my buddy is too. He's glad to see that she's doing well in there and not getting harassed or whatever. And she's got a great big tank to swim around in. So that's a win-win for both of us. So moving on to my 20-gallon Angelfish tank. This tank is definitely ready for something new. I'm just tired of looking at it. All I've got in here is the Angelfish. I've got one little clown pleco that lives underneath of that rock right there, and I've got one female cherry barb that swims around in this tank, and that's it. I don't even have any guppies. I don't have anything. I'm always having issues with the glass getting filthy and stuff growing on the bottom. I don't think I have enough water circulation in this tank. I may add an air stone. I may add a circulation pump like a power head. I don't know, but one of the things I'm going to do is get in here and really thin out, possibly even fully remove the Java fern that's in here. And I might even just rescape the tank altogether and just redo it. I'm just getting kind of tired of looking at it. I know we can't even really get a good look at it today with the glass being so boogered up like that. But I mean, you get the idea. It's lush and thick and overgrown, and I got the, you know, the cyanobacteria and the red and the green growing on that and everything. So this tank just feels like it's ready for a little bit of a revamp for me. So not a lot to talk about there. We'll do something with that when we do it. And of course, I'll get it all on video when we get around to doing it. And down here, excuse me, down here in one of my quarantine tanks, I'm now running 2 quarantine tanks. I've just got a bunch of red wag platies. They are waiting to go in some tank somewhere. I don't know where yet. At least a few of them are probably going to go in my office tank, and I think I'm probably going to put the other ones in my waterfall tank. I've considered putting some of them in my native tank. I know they're not technically native to around here, and they are, you know, sort of hybrid manufactured. You're not going to find red wag platies in the wild, but platies are a native fish to North America, and they would be a nice little splash of color in my native tank. And my regular viewers know I'm not a stickler for biotopes and everything. I'd have no problem still calling that my native tank, even though it has some, you know, mollies or platies or something swimming around in there. So I'll have to wait and see what happens with that too. But probably going to end up in my waterfall tank and my office tank. So moving on to my, still calling it my brackish tank, even though the water technically is not brackish anymore, but it was for many, many years. And again, my regular viewers know that my tanks just kind of have names so that they have playlists more so than they have descriptions. So this is still my brackish tank, regardless of what the condition of the water is. And if you'll notice, I've got one little guppy fry swimming around there. There's another little guppy fry swimming around in the back that I just saw a moment ago. We got some more guppies swimming around up around the surface. So there's that little one in the back. So I've definitely got guppies in there breeding. As far as I can tell, Butterbean doesn't bother the guppies. He doesn't bother the fry. He just goes in there and does his thing and swims around. He is probably the most mild-mannered pufferfish I've ever met in my life. I actually had ghost shrimp living in this tank with him for a few years before they finally disappeared. And I don't know whether he caught them and ate them or they died and he eventually ate them. But he's a pufferfish that lived with ghost shrimp without being aggressive towards them for many years. So again, the most timid puffer I've ever seen. I used to keep like mollies and stuff in the tank with him, but the other fish stressed him out. I was always under the impression that you had to be worried about the puffer eating your molly, you know, or nipping its fins or something. But in this case, it was the puffer that was always stressed out by the other fish. And so that's why Butterbean is practically in a tank by himself now. Just a few little guppies swimming around in there because he is very, very easily stressed out. So that's about it. I did a water change on this tank this week, and I shot a video about that, but, you know, that was about it. It was just a water change. I'm going to try to wrap this up before my video file exceeds its limit, and then I got to stitch 2 videos together, so we're going to call that good right there. I'm going to say thanks for walking around the world with me. We'll see what we get up to today, and, of course, I will get any of that on video, too, so make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss that or anything else I got coming up, and hopefully we'll be able to sort of get to the bottom of some of these mysteries together, because again, my regular viewers know I document all this kind of stuff when I'm in here working on these problems or whatever you want to call them with my tanks. So thanks again. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget, this one here is my 29 miscellaneous tank. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.